The gate was locked, but the lock did not matter, because the fence beside it had fallen long ago. Daniel Hart stood at the edge of the yard he once ran through as a boy, and his hands were shaking before he even took the first step toward the house. 3 years had passed since anyone had heard his voice. 3 years since the letters stopped, since the telegram arrived, since his name was read out in a quiet room full of people who believed he was gone forever. Now he was standing here, alive, breathing, and completely unprepared for what he was about to find. The porch light was on. That alone stopped him cold. He remembered turning that light off himself the night before he left, locking the door behind him with the quiet certainty that he would return in a year, maybe 2. He never imagined it would take this long, and he never imagined that someone else would be living inside the walls that still, in his mind, belonged only to him and his family. He heard laughter first, a child's laughter, high and bright, carried through the open window. Then a second voice, smaller, sharper, arguing about something that did not matter to anyone but the two of them. Daniel froze at the bottom of the steps. His mind raced through every explanation that made sense. Perhaps his mother had taken in a family to help pay the bills. Perhaps a cousin had moved in during his absence. Perhaps this was simply a misunderstanding, and he had walked up the wrong path in the growing dark. But when the front door opened, and a woman stepped out holding a lantern, Daniel knew instantly that nothing about this was a misunderstanding. She was young, maybe 30, with tired eyes and a strength in her posture that suggested she had carried more weight than her frame should have allowed. Behind her, 2 small figures peeked around her legs, curious and cautious at the same time. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her voice steady but wary, the way anyone speaks to a stranger standing uninvited in the dark. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked past her, at the door, at the worn wood he remembered painting himself one summer years ago. He looked at the 2 children, a boy and a girl, watching him with wide eyes. "This is my house," he finally said, his voice rough from disuse and disbelief. "I grew up here. I don't understand who you are, or why you are living in it." The woman's face changed in an instant. The wariness sharpened into something closer to fear, and she stepped back slightly, pulling the children gently behind her. "That's not possible," she said. "This house was left to my husband. He passed away 2 years ago. I have lived here since." Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him, though he had not moved an inch. "Your husband," he repeated slowly. "What was his name?" The woman hesitated, studying his face now with a different kind of attention, as though searching for something familiar in his features. "Ethan," she said quietly. "Ethan Hart." The name hit Daniel like a blow to the chest. Ethan was his younger brother, the boy he used to carry on his shoulders through this very yard, the boy who begged him not to leave when the orders came, the boy who, apparently, had died while Daniel was gone, and who had, somehow, built an entire life in this house without Daniel ever knowing. "Ethan is my brother," Daniel said, and the words came out cracked, unsteady. "I am his brother, Daniel." The woman's lantern trembled in her hand. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The 2 children peered out from behind her skirt, sensing that something important, something they did not fully understand, was happening in front of them. "You were supposed to be dead," the woman whispered. "Everyone said you were dead." "I was a prisoner," Daniel said. "I only just made it back." The silence between them stretched long enough that even the children stopped fidgeting. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice and went quiet. The wind moved through the tall grass at the edge of the yard, and Daniel felt, for the first time since he had returned to this town, that the ground beneath his feet was no longer solid. "My name is Claire," the woman finally said. "Claire Bennett. I was married to your brother. These are his children. Lily and Noah." Daniel looked at the 2 small faces again, really looked this time, and something in his chest tightened painfully. The boy had Ethan's eyes, the exact same shape, the exact same color, staring back at him from a face far too young to carry such a resemblance to a man who was gone. "I did not know he had children," Daniel said. "I did not know he was married. I did not know any of this." "How could you?" Claire asked, not unkindly, but with a weariness that suggested she had been carrying this entire situation alone for longer than anyone should have to. "You were gone. We were told you were never coming back." Daniel took a step closer to the porch, and Claire instinctively moved the children further behind her, a mother's reflex against an unknown man in the dark, even one who claimed to share blood with her late husband. Daniel stopped himself immediately, raising his hands slightly, palms open. "I mean no harm," he said. "I only want to understand. This was my father's house before it was anyone's. I left it locked. I left it empty. Now I come home and find a family living inside it that I never knew existed. Your father," Claire said carefully, "gave this house to Ethan before he passed. At least, that is what Ethan always told me. I never saw papers. I never asked. I trusted my husband." Daniel felt a headache building behind his eyes, the exhaustion of years finally catching up to him all at once. He had imagined 100 different homecomings during his years away. He had imagined his mother's arms around him, his father's proud handshake, even Ethan waiting by the door with a grin on his face. He had never once imagined standing outside his own house, a stranger to the woman living inside it, staring at 2 children who shared his brother's blood but not his name. "Can we talk inside?" Daniel asked. "It is cold, and this conversation deserves more than standing in the dark." Claire studied him for a long moment, weighing something in her mind that Daniel could not fully read. Finally she nodded, though her grip on the lantern did not loosen. "Come in," she said, but slowly. "The children are not used to strangers." Daniel followed her up the steps he had built with his own father decades ago. Through the door he had once painted a deep shade of green that had since faded under years of sun and rain. Inside, the house looked both familiar and completely foreign at once. The furniture was different. The walls held photographs of people he did not recognize, and yet the bones of the house, the shape of the rooms, the creak of the third stair, all remained exactly as he remembered. Lily, the little girl, tugged on Claire's sleeve and whispered something Daniel could not hear. Claire knelt down and answered softly, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face, before standing again to face Daniel with new resolve. "She wants to know if you are a ghost," Claire said, a faint, exhausted smile crossing her lips for the first time. "I told her I am not entirely sure myself." Daniel almost laughed, despite everything, despite the strange grief pressing on his chest for a brother he had not yet had time to mourn. "I am not a ghost," he said gently, looking down at the little girl. "I am very much alive. I am your uncle." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning none of them were fully ready to carry. Claire's expression flickered with something unreadable, somewhere between relief and fear, as though the arrival of this stranger, this brother returned from the dead, threatened to unravel every fragile piece of stability she had built over the past 2 years. "You should sit," Claire said finally, gesturing toward the small table near the fireplace. "There is a great deal you do not know, Daniel, and I suspect there is a great deal I do not know either." Daniel lowered himself into the chair, feeling the weight of the day, the weight of the years, settle heavily onto his shoulders. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling gently against the windows, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next inside its old and familiar walls. Claire set the lantern down on the table between them, its flame flickering against the darkened room, throwing long shadows across the walls Daniel had known his entire childhood. The children, Lily and Noah, stood close together near the doorway, watching the stranger with a mixture of curiosity and caution that only children seem capable of holding at once. "Before anything else," Claire said, folding her hands tightly in her lap, "I need you to know that I never meant to take anything from you. I did not know you were alive. None of us did." Daniel nodded slowly, though his mind was still catching up to the enormity of what he had just learned. His brother, married. His brother, a father. His brother, gone, in a house that still smelled faintly of the same wood polish his mother used decades earlier. "Tell me what happened," Daniel said quietly. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." "I have been gone a long time, Claire, and I have a great deal to understand." Claire took a breath, glancing briefly at her children before meeting Daniel's eyes again, steady and unflinching despite the exhaustion carved into every line of her face. "It started 3 years ago," she began, "not long after you were reported missing." Claire's voice was calm at first, the practiced calm of someone who had told this story to herself so many times that the words no longer cut as deeply as they once did. She explained that Ethan had never stopped hoping Daniel would come home. For months after the telegram arrived, He refused to accept it, writing letters to offices and officials, asking for confirmation, asking for anything that might prove the report wrong. When no answer ever came, something in him changed. He grew quieter, more guarded, though he never lost his gentleness, not toward her, and not toward the children who came soon after. "I met him almost a year after you left," Claire said. "I was working at the market in town, and he used to come in every week for supplies. He barely spoke at first. He carried a sadness with him that I did not understand until much later. It took months before he told me about you." Daniel listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on the flickering lantern between them, though his attention was entirely on her words. It was strange to hear his own absence described from the outside, to hear how his disappearance had rippled through the life of a brother he had not seen in years. "We married quietly," Claire continued. "There was no large gathering. Ethan did not feel it was right to celebrate while you were still missing. It felt, to him, like celebrating without you there. But he wanted a family. He wanted something steady after everything that had happened. Lily came first, and then Noah, less than 2 years later." Noah, hearing his name, looked up from where he sat near the doorway, then quickly looked away again, shy under the weight of the stranger's attention. Daniel felt something twist inside his chest, a mixture of grief and tenderness he had not expected to feel so soon. "Your father," Claire went on, her voice dropping slightly, "grew ill not long after Noah was born. He never fully recovered. Before he passed, he told Ethan that the house should be his, that it was time for a young family to fill these rooms again. He said it plainly, in front of witnesses, though nothing was ever written down properly. Ethan always meant to visit a lawyer and make it official. He simply believed there was time." "There is rarely as much time as we believe," Daniel said quietly, almost to himself. Claire nodded, her eyes glistening in the low light. "Ethan died a little over 2 years ago. There was an accident on the road just outside of town, during a storm. He was returning from delivering goods to a neighboring farm. The wagon overturned. It was over before anyone could reach him. The room fell silent except for the soft crackle of the fire and the faint sound of the children shifting near the door. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, trying to picture his brother's final moments, trying and failing to reconcile the boy he remembered with the man who had lived and died entirely without him. "I am sorry," Daniel said finally. "I am sorry I was not here, for any of it." "You could not have known," Claire replied, though her voice carried no anger, only a tired kind of understanding. "None of us could have known how any of this would unfold." For a while, neither of them spoke. The lantern flame dipped and steadied, casting shifting shadows across the old wooden beams above them. Daniel studied the room again, searching for traces of the life he once knew, and finding instead a life built entirely without him, one he was now being asked to somehow step into and understand. "What happens now?" Daniel asked eventually, though he was not entirely certain what he meant by the question. Now that he was here, now that the truth was known, now that 2 households, 2 griefs, 2 entirely different versions of the same family had collided in this one small room. Claire's expression tightened, and for the first time since he arrived, Daniel saw real fear behind her eyes. "I do not know," she admitted. "This house was never legally mine, or Ethan's, not on paper. If it belongs to you, truly belongs to you, then I have no claim to any of it. I have nowhere else to take the children. I have very little saved, and even less family of my own to turn to." Daniel felt the weight of her words settle heavily across his shoulders. He thought of his own years as a prisoner, the long stretches of uncertainty, the constant fear of losing everything with no way to fight back against it. He recognized that same fear now, reflected plainly across Claire's face. "I did not come home to take anything from a widow and 2 children," Daniel said firmly. "Whatever legal truth exists, I will not act on it carelessly. You have my word on that, at least for tonight." Claire studied him carefully, as though testing the sincerity behind his words, searching for any sign of falseness. Whatever she found seemed to ease something in her posture, though the tension in her shoulders did not fully disappear. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That is more kindness than I expected from a stranger standing at my door in the dark." "I am not entirely a stranger," Daniel reminded her gently. "I am family. whether either of us fully understands what that means yet. A quiet knock interrupted them before Claire could respond, startling all four of them. Lily jumped slightly and moved closer to her mother, while Noah's eyes widened with a child's instinctive alertness to unfamiliar sounds after dark. Claire rose slowly, glancing toward the window, though little could be seen through the darkness outside. "Who would come calling at this hour?" she murmured, more to herself than to Daniel. She crossed to the door and opened it carefully, the lantern raised slightly to illuminate whoever stood beyond the threshold. A man stood there, older, dressed in a long coat despite the mild evening, holding a leather case under one arm. His expression was polite but firm, the look of someone accustomed to delivering unwelcome news. "Mrs. Bennet," the man said, nodding respectfully toward Claire. "I apologize for the late hour. My name is Arthur Doyle. I represent the Regional Land Office. I have come regarding the ownership documents for this property." Claire's grip on the door tightened visibly. "This is not a good time," she said. "We have a guest." Arthur Doyle's gaze shifted past her, landing on Daniel seated near the fire. Something flickered across his expression, a flash of recognition that surprised even Daniel himself. "Forgive me," Doyle said slowly, "but are you by any chance Daniel Hart?" Daniel rose from his chair, startled by the question. "I am," he answered carefully. "How do you know my name?" "Because," Doyle said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, "your name appears on documents that were filed with our office nearly 4 years ago, shortly before your father passed away. Documents that, until this moment, we believed belonged to a man long presumed dead." The room seemed to grow colder despite the fire crackling steadily in the hearth. Claire looked between the two men, confusion and dread mingling openly across her face. "What documents?" she asked. "What are you talking about?" Arthur Doyle opened his leather case and withdrew a folded paper, worn slightly at the edges from handling. "Your father-in-law," he said, addressing Claire directly now, "filed an official deed transfer shortly before his passing. Contrary to what many in town believed, the property was never formally transferred to your late husband. It remained, and still remains, legally registered under the name of his elder son." Claire's face went pale. "That cannot be right," she said. "Ethan told me the house was his. He told me his father promised it to him." "A promise," Doyle said gently, though there was no cruelty in his tone, only the plain weight of fact, "is not the same as a legal transfer, Mrs. Bennet. Whatever was spoken between father and son, the paperwork tells a different story. This house, according to every official record, belongs entirely to Daniel Hart." Daniel felt the full force of the revelation settle over him, heavier even than the shock of finding Claire and the children in his home just hours earlier. He looked at Claire, at the fear now plainly written across her face, at the two children clutching each other near the doorway, sensing without fully understanding that something important, something frightening, had just shifted beneath their feet. "This changes nothing about my promise," Daniel said quickly, meeting Claire's eyes directly. "Legal papers or not, I told you I would not act carelessly, and I meant it." But even as he spoke the words, Daniel understood that the situation had grown far more complicated than a simple homecoming. He was no longer merely a brother returning to grieve and adjust. He was, according to the law, the sole owner of a house currently sheltering a widow and 2 children, who had built their entire lives within its walls, believing every day that it rightfully belonged to them. Arthur Doyle cleared his throat, glancing between the two of them with the careful neutrality of a man who dealt often in difficult truths. "There is more," he said quietly. "The land office has received an inquiry regarding this property. Someone else has come forward claiming a right to purchase it, unaware that its rightful owner had returned. If action is not taken soon, this matter may grow considerably more complicated than a simple misunderstanding." Claire's breath caught audibly, and she reached instinctively for her children, pulling them close against her sides. Daniel felt a fresh wave of tension tighten across his shoulders, the quiet homecoming he had imagined during years of captivity, dissolving rapidly into something far more uncertain, far more dangerous to the fragile peace he had hoped to find. "Who has made this claim?" Daniel asked, his voice sharper now, edged with a protectiveness he had not expected to feel so quickly toward people he had only just met. Arthur Doyle hesitated, glancing down at his papers before answering. "A man named Gerald Finch," he said finally. He claims to hold a debt owed by your late father, one he says entitles him to seize the property in absence of a living, verified heir. Until tonight, our office believed no such heir existed. The name meant nothing to Daniel, and yet the threat behind it settled instantly and heavily across the room, transforming what had been a quiet, painful reunion into something far more urgent. Whatever grief, whatever confusion, whatever fragile understanding Daniel and Claire had begun building between them in the past hour, it was now overshadowed by a new and pressing danger, one that threatened to take the house, and everything within it, away from all of them entirely. Gerald Finch, Daniel repeated slowly, testing the unfamiliar name on his tongue. I have never heard my father speak that name. Your father may have kept the matter private, Doyle said. Debts of this nature are rarely spoken of openly, especially within a household. From what our records show, the debt was taken on many years ago, before your departure, to cover the costs of a failed harvest. It seems your father never fully repaid the sum before his passing. Claire sank slowly into the chair beside the fire, her hands trembling slightly as she pressed them together in her lap. Ethan never mentioned any debt, she said quietly. He never once spoke of money owed to anyone outside the family. It is possible he did not know, Doyle offered, not unkindly. These matters can remain buried for years, only surfacing when someone with a claim decides the moment is right to pursue it. Daniel studied the lawyer carefully, searching for any sign of deception in his expression, though he found none. Doyle appeared, if anything, uncomfortable with the news he carried, a man simply doing his duty, rather than someone invested in the outcome. What happens next? Daniel asked. If this Gerald Finch believes he has a claim, what steps will he take? He has already filed a formal request with our office, Doyle said, asking that the property be reviewed for transfer, given what he believed was an absence of a living heir. Now that you have returned, the matter becomes considerably more complex. He will likely still pursue the debt itself, even if the property remains yours. You should expect him to visit, and soon. Men like Finch do not let matters rest quietly once they have set their sights on a resolution. The warning hung heavily in the room, and Daniel felt Claire's eyes on him, searching his face for reassurance he was not entirely certain he could offer. The children, sensing the shift in mood despite understanding little of the actual conversation, had grown quiet near the doorway, watching the adults with wide, uncertain eyes. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Daniel said finally, rising to see Doyle to the door. I will need time to understand the full situation before deciding how to proceed. That is wise, Doyle said, gathering his papers back into his leather case. I would advise moving quickly, however. Debts left unattended tend to grow more troublesome with time, not less. After Doyle departed into the darkness outside, the house fell into a heavy silence. Claire remained seated by the fire, staring into the flames as though searching for answers within them. Daniel closed the door slowly and turned to face her, uncertain of what words might ease the fear so plainly written across her face. I did not expect any of this, Claire said quietly, without looking up. I thought, after Ethan died, that the worst had already happened. I thought I simply needed to survive, to raise these children as best I could, and somehow find a way forward. I never imagined a debt from your father's past would return to threaten the only home we have left. We will face it together, Daniel said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. He had not planned to say we. He had not planned, in the span of a single evening, to align himself so completely with a woman and two children he had known for only a few hours. And yet, standing in this house that held echoes of his entire childhood, watching Claire's quiet strength fight against an exhaustion that clearly ran deep, Daniel felt an unexpected resolve settle firmly within him. Claire looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face for any hint of insincerity. Whatever she found seemed to steady something within her, though the worry did not fully leave her expression. Why would you help us? She asked. You have every right to simply take the house and send us on our way. The law, it seems, is entirely on your side. Because you are Ethan's family, Daniel said simply, which means you are my family too, whether either of us expected it or not. I did not survive years as a prisoner only to come home and abandon the only people my brother left behind. The children, sensing perhaps that the tension in the room had eased slightly, crept closer to the fire, drawn by its warmth after the chill of the evening's events. Noah settled quietly at his mother's feet, while Lily hovered near Daniel with the curious boldness only young children seem to possess. "Are you really our uncle?" Lily asked, tilting her head as she studied him. Daniel knelt down slowly to meet her eyes at her own height, softening his expression as best he could despite the weight pressing on his chest. "I am," he said gently. "I am your father's older brother. I knew him when he was younger than you are now." Lily considered this information seriously, the way children often weigh new facts against the world they already understand. "Did he talk about you?" she asked. "Papa, I mean." Daniel felt his throat tighten unexpectedly at the question. "I do not know," he admitted honestly. "I was gone a long time before you were born, but I imagine he must have thought of me, the same way I often thought of him, even from very far away." Claire watched this exchange with an expression Daniel could not fully read, something between grief and cautious hope. The fire crackled steadily between them, filling the room with warmth that felt, for the first time that evening, almost comfortable despite everything that had just unfolded. "It grows late," Claire said eventually, rising from her chair. "The children should be resting. Tomorrow, we can speak further about what must be done, about this debt, about Gerald Finch, about all of it. Tonight, I think we have all endured enough." Daniel nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words, though his mind continued to churn with questions that refused to quiet themselves. "Is there somewhere nearby I might stay?" he asked. "I do not wish to impose further upon your evening, especially after everything already revealed tonight." Claire hesitated, glancing briefly toward the small room at the end of the hallway, one Daniel recognized immediately as his childhood bedroom. "There is space here," she said carefully. "It seems foolish for the rightful owner of this house to seek shelter elsewhere. Please, stay. We will manage the rest as it comes." Daniel accepted the offer gratefully, though sleep, when it finally came hours later, remained thin and restless, filled with fragmented images of his brother's face, of Gerald Finch's unknown features forming and dissolving in the darkness of his mind, and of the uncertain days that surely lay ahead for all of them, now bound together beneath this single roof. Morning arrived with a pale, uncertain light. Filtering through curtains Daniel did not remember hanging. He woke stiffly, unused to the softness of a real bed after years of hard ground and harder nights, and for a moment, he forgot entirely where he was. Then the sounds of the house returned to him, the clatter of dishes, the quiet murmur of Claire's voice speaking softly to her children, and the events of the previous evening came rushing back with sudden clarity. He dressed quickly and made his way toward the kitchen, where Claire stood at the stove, her back to him, while Lily and Noah sat at the table, quietly finishing their breakfast. The scene held an unexpected tenderness, a domestic peace that felt almost impossible given everything discussed only hours earlier. "Good morning," Claire said, glancing over her shoulder as he entered. "I hope you slept, even a little." "A little," Daniel admitted, taking a seat across from the children, who watched him with far less caution than they had the previous night. Sleep, it seemed, had softened their wariness considerably, enough to think clearly at least. Claire set a simple plate before him, bread and a small portion of eggs, and Daniel accepted it gratefully, realizing only then how long it had been since he had eaten a proper meal in a proper home. For a moment the four of them sat together in something resembling ordinary family life, a fragile illusion neither of them dared name aloud. "I have been thinking about Gerald Finch," Daniel said eventually, breaking the comfortable silence. "About what Doyle told us last night." Claire's expression tightened slightly, though she continued clearing the table with steady hands. "I have thought of little else," she admitted. "I barely slept." "I intend to speak with him directly," Daniel said. "Better to understand exactly what he believes he is owed, and by whom, than to wait anxiously for him to arrive uninvited, as Doyle did last night." "Do you think that is wise?" Claire asked, concern evident in her voice. "You know nothing about this man. He may not respond well to being confronted." "I have faced far more dangerous men than a debt collector seeking payment," Daniel said, though the memory behind those words carried a weight he did not fully wish to share so soon after breakfast. Claire seemed to sense this, and did not press further, though her eyes lingered on him with quiet curiosity. Later that morning, After the children had gone to play in the yard under Claire's watchful eye, Daniel found himself walking the familiar road into town, retracing steps he had not taken in years. Much had changed. New shops had replaced old ones. Unfamiliar faces filled the streets, yet the bones of the town remained recognizable beneath its shifted surface, much like the house he had returned to the previous evening. He found the land office easily enough, and Arthur Doyle greeted him with a mixture of surprise and cautious respect. "Mr. Hart," Doyle said, rising from his desk, "I did not expect to see you so soon." "I wish to speak with Gerald Finch directly," Daniel said, foregoing pleasantries entirely. "Can you tell me where I might find him?" Doyle hesitated, studying Daniel carefully before answering. "He keeps an office near the grain mill, on the eastern edge of town. I must warn you, Mr. Hart, Finch is not known for patience or generosity in these matters. He has, over the years, acquired several properties through debts left unpaid by their original owners. Then perhaps it is time someone faced him directly, rather than waiting for him to claim what does not belong to him," Daniel said firmly. Doyle did not argue further. Though his expression suggested a quiet concern he chose not to voice aloud. Daniel thanked him and continued toward the grain mill, his resolve hardening with every step, though beneath that resolve, uncertainty churned steadily, the same uncertainty he had grown accustomed to carrying through years of captivity, when every decision carried consequences far beyond his control. The office near the grain mill was modest, tucked between a blacksmith shop and a small stable, marked only by a simple wooden sign bearing the name Finch in faded lettering. Daniel entered without hesitation, finding a narrow room lined with shelves of paper, and a man seated behind a heavy desk, his attention fixed on a ledger before him. The man looked up slowly as Daniel entered, his expression unreadable, calculating in a way that immediately put Daniel on guard. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice smooth and measured. "I am looking for Gerald Finch," Daniel said. "You have found him," the man replied, setting down his pen with deliberate slowness. "And you, I presume, are the recently returned Daniel Hart. News travels quickly in a town this size." "Then you already know why I am here," Daniel said, choosing not to waste time with unnecessary formality. Finch leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel with open curiosity. "I know that a debt remains unpaid from your father's estate," he said. "A debt I intend to collect, regardless of who now claims ownership of the property tied to it. My father is not here to answer for whatever arrangement existed between the two of you," Daniel said, "and I have only just learned of this debt myself, less than a day ago." "That does not change its validity," Finch replied evenly. "Debts do not disappear simply because the debtor has passed, Mr. Hart. They transfer, quite naturally, to those who inherit what the debtor left behind. In this case, that inheritance appears to be a rather comfortable house, currently occupied by a widow and 2 children who, as far as the law is concerned, have no legal claim to it whatsoever." Daniel felt anger rising sharply within him, though he forced himself to remain outwardly composed, recognizing that losing his temper now would serve no purpose beyond satisfying a momentary urge. "What is the sum owed?" he asked instead. Finch named a figure that struck Daniel with considerable force, far larger than he had anticipated, a sum that would take considerable time and effort to gather, especially so soon after his return, with little income and fewer resources at his immediate disposal. "That is a significant amount," Daniel said carefully. "It is," Finch agreed, with no trace of sympathy in his tone. "I am, however, a reasonable man, Mr. Hart. I am willing to offer time, provided some arrangement is reached soon. Otherwise, I will have little choice but to pursue the property itself as settlement, regardless of who currently resides within it." "You would take a home from a widow and 2 young children," Daniel said, "over a debt that was never theirs to begin with." "Business is rarely sentimental," Finch replied, unmoved. "I suggest you consider your options carefully, Mr. Hart. You have 30 days to bring forward a reasonable portion of the sum owed, or discuss terms I find acceptable. After that, I will proceed with the process already begun before your unexpected return." Daniel left the office with a heavy weight settling deep in his chest, the confrontation having yielded little beyond a clearer understanding of the danger now facing the house and everyone within it. 30 days felt impossibly short, especially for a man who had returned home with nothing beyond the clothes on his back, and a mind still adjusting to freedom after years of captivity. He walked back through town slowly, turning the conversation over in his mind, searching for any possible path forward. He considered speaking with Doyle again, perhaps seeking some official protection or delay, though he suspected the law, however sympathetic, moved slowly, compared to the urgency now required. By the time Daniel returned to the house, the sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard where Lily and Noah still played, their laughter carrying easily through the evening air, blissfully unaware of the danger now threatening the only home they had ever known. Claire spotted him approaching and met him at the edge of the yard, reading the tension plainly written across his face before he spoke a single word. "It did not go well," she said quietly, not quite a question. "He wants payment within 30 days, Daniel said, or he intends to pursue the property itself as settlement for a debt neither of us created." Claire's face paled, though she straightened her shoulders with visible determination, refusing to let the fear fully overtake her in front of the children still playing nearby. 30 days, she repeated softly. "That is not much time at all." "No," Daniel agreed, "it is not." They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the children chase each other through the fading light. Both adults burdened with a shared understanding, neither wished to voice aloud in front of Lily and Noah. Whatever peace Daniel had hoped to find upon returning home had transformed, within the span of a single day, into a battle neither he nor Claire had anticipated fighting, a battle that would test not only their resources, but the fragile, unexpected bond quietly forming between two people, brought together by grief, and now bound tightly by shared danger. "We will find a way," Daniel said finally, though even as he spoke the words, he was uncertain exactly how such a promise might be kept. "I did not survive years of captivity, only to lose everything now, in the very place I fought so hard to return to." Claire looked at him for a long moment, something shifting quietly behind her tired eyes, before she nodded slowly, drawing strength from his resolve even as her own uncertainty remained plainly visible beneath the surface. "Then we face it together," she said, echoing his words from the previous night. "Whatever it takes." That evening, after the children had finally settled into an uneasy sleep, Daniel and Claire sat together by the fire once more, discussing every possible option available to them, weighing risks against the fading light of 30 short days, unaware that Gerald Finch, even as they spoke, had already begun setting additional plans into motion, plans that would soon bring far greater danger to their door than either of them yet realized. "Tell me about the years you were gone," Claire said quietly, watching the flames dance in the hearth. "If we are to face this together, perhaps it helps to understand each other fully first." Daniel was silent for a long moment, uncertain how much of that darkness he wished to share, though something in Claire's steady patience encouraged him to continue rather than retreat into silence, as he had done with so many others since his return. "We were captured during a retreat," he began slowly. "Our unit was separated, and I was taken along with a handful of others. For the first year, I believed rescue would come soon. I clung to that belief, the way a drowning man clings to driftwood. When no rescue came, I learned instead to simply survive, one day at a time, without allowing myself to hope for much beyond it." Claire listened without interrupting, her eyes fixed on him with quiet compassion rather than pity, a distinction Daniel appreciated more than she likely realized. "There were others held with me," Daniel continued, "men who did not make it home. I think of them often, wondering why I survived when they did not. I have no answer for that, only the fact of my continued existence, which some days feels less like fortune and more like an unexplainable accident." "Perhaps it was not accident," Claire offered gently. "Perhaps you were meant to come home, exactly when you did, to find us here, exactly as we are." Daniel considered this thought carefully, turning it over in his mind. "Perhaps," he admitted, "though I confess, when I imagined this homecoming during those long years, I never once pictured finding a widow and 2 children living within these walls, facing a debt collector, determined to take everything away, before I had even fully settled back into my own life." Claire allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Life rarely unfolds as we imagine it," she said. I certainly never imagined raising 2 children alone, in a house I believed fully belonged to my family, only to discover it was never truly ours to begin with. They sat together in companionable silence for a while, the fire slowly burning lower, before Claire spoke again, her voice softer now, more hesitant. "Ethan spoke of you sometimes," she admitted. "Not often, because it pained him greatly, but occasionally, late at night, he would mention his older brother, the one who taught him to fish in the creek behind this very house, the one who protected him from other boys in town who thought him too quiet, too gentle for his own good." Daniel felt his throat tighten unexpectedly at this unexpected gift, this small window into a version of his brother's grief he had not known existed. "I did not know he carried that with him," Daniel said quietly. "I assumed, after so many years apart, that he had simply moved forward without much thought of me." "He never stopped thinking of you," Claire said firmly. "Not for a single day, I believe, though he rarely spoke it aloud. Grief, I have learned, often hides itself in silence rather than open expression." Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing this information alongside the weight of everything else revealed since his return. The fire crackled softly between them, and for a moment, the looming threat of Gerald Finch and his 30-day deadline felt distant, overshadowed by this fragile, growing understanding forming steadily between two people bound together by loss neither had chosen. "We should rest," Claire finally said, rising from her chair as the fire burned down to gentle embers. "Tomorrow, we begin searching for a way through this, whatever it requires." Daniel agreed, though sleep once again proved elusive that night, his mind turning steadily between memories of captivity, the fresh grief of a brother he barely had time to properly mourn, and the growing weight of responsibility now settling firmly upon his shoulders, responsibility not only for himself, but for a family he had known for barely a day, yet already felt bound to protect with everything he had left to give. Meanwhile, across town, Gerald Finch sat alone in his office long after the sun had set, reviewing papers by lamplight, with the careful, patient attention of a man accustomed to playing long games rather than seeking quick, uncertain victories. He had heard, through careful inquiry earlier that day, that Daniel Hart possessed little beyond his return itself. No significant savings, no immediate means of gathering the sum required within the time frame given. Finch smiled thinly to himself, setting aside one folder in favor of another, this one containing details regarding a separate, more immediate opportunity. If the Hart family proved unable to gather sufficient funds within 30 days, as he strongly suspected they would, the property would fall naturally into his possession, and he had already identified a buyer willing to pay handsomely for land situated so favorably near the town's central roads. He had not survived years of careful business dealings by allowing sentiment to interfere with profitable opportunities, and he saw no reason why the unexpected return of a presumed dead soldier should change that established practice now. If anything, Finch considered, Daniel Hart's return merely added a complication easily managed through patience and the steady, unyielding application of legal pressure. Pressure he intended to apply with increasing urgency, as the 30 days steadily counted down toward their inevitable conclusion. The following days passed in a blur of effort and mounting worry. Daniel rose early each morning, walking into town in search of any work available, any means of gathering funds quickly enough to satisfy Finch's demand before the 30 days expired. He found small jobs here and there, repairing fences, hauling supplies, work that paid modestly, but nowhere near the sum required to settle the debt entirely. Claire, for her part, took in extra sewing work from families in town, her hands moving late into each evening by candlelight, adding whatever small amount she could to the growing pile of coins Daniel kept carefully counted in a small wooden box on the kitchen shelf. Neither of them spoke openly of how far short that pile remained from the total Finch demanded, though the unspoken awareness hung heavily between them each night as they reviewed the count together. One evening, nearly 2 weeks into their efforts, Daniel returned from town later than usual, his expression troubled in a way Claire had not yet seen since his arrival. She set aside her sewing immediately, sensing something significant had occurred. "What happened?" she asked. Daniel sat heavily at the table, running a hand through his hair before answering. "I spoke with several men in town today, former soldiers I served alongside years ago. One of them mentioned Ethan," he said slowly. He told me things about my brother I did not previously know. What things? Claire asked carefully, noting the tension evident in Daniel's voice. He told me Ethan was offered the chance to join the effort as well. When the call first went out, Daniel said. He chose to stay behind instead, citing responsibilities here at home. I never knew that. I always believed Ethan simply was not called, or was found unfit somehow. I never imagined he made a choice, while I was fighting, while I was eventually captured and held for years, that he could have shared that burden and chose instead to remain safely here. Claire studied Daniel carefully, recognizing the old, complicated resentment surfacing plainly in his expression. Resentment she suspected had lingered quietly within him long before this particular revelation, waiting only for confirmation to fully surface. Ethan was frightened, she said gently. He told me once, though rarely, that he carried guilt over that decision his entire life. He believed, perhaps wrongly, that someone needed to remain behind to care for your parents as they aged, and he convinced himself that duty justified his choice. Convenient reasoning, Daniel said, an edge creeping into his voice he immediately regretted, though he could not fully suppress it. While I endured years of captivity, my brother built an entire life here, a family, a home, all while I suffered believing I fought for both of us. Claire's expression hardened slightly, though her voice remained steady. He suffered too, Daniel, in his own way. Guilt is its own kind of prison, even without physical chains. I watched him carry that weight every single day of our marriage, watched him flinch whenever your name arose in conversation, watched him struggle beneath a burden he never fully forgave himself for choosing. Daniel fell silent, absorbing her words carefully, recognizing the unfairness in directing years of accumulated resentment toward a brother no longer present to defend himself, especially in front of the woman who had loved him despite whatever flaws he carried. I am sorry, Daniel said eventually. That was unkind of me, especially toward his memory, and toward you. Claire accepted the apology with a small nod, though the tension in the room did not immediately dissolve. We are both carrying burdens neither of us fully chose, she said. Perhaps it serves us better to focus that energy toward the challenge currently facing us, rather than resentments belonging to a past neither of us can change now. Daniel agreed, though the conversation lingered uncomfortably in his mind over the following days, complicating his resolve, even as he continued working tirelessly toward gathering the funds needed. He found himself watching Lily and Noah with a mixture of tenderness and quiet grief, recognizing in their faces not only his brother's features, but also the unresolved complexity of a relationship he would now never have the chance to properly mend. Nearly 3 weeks into the 30-day deadline, with the wooden box on the kitchen shelf still holding barely half the sum required, Arthur Doyle arrived unexpectedly at the house one afternoon, his expression grave as Claire welcomed him inside. I bring troubling news, Doyle said without preamble, once Daniel joined them at the table. Gerald Finch has grown impatient. He has petitioned the regional court for an expedited hearing, seeking immediate transfer of the property, citing insufficient progress toward settling the debt within the agreed time frame. The 30 days have not yet expired, Daniel said sharply. He agreed to that time frame himself. He has found a legal justification allowing him to challenge that agreement early, Doyle explained carefully, citing concern that the debt remains entirely unaddressed, rather than partially settled. I fear he intends to seize the property well before the original deadline arrives, using this expedited hearing as his method. Claire's face drained of color entirely, her hands gripping the edge of the table as though needing something solid to hold against the sudden surge of fear. When is this hearing scheduled? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 5 days from now, Doyle said grimly. I am sorry to bring such news, but I believed it essential you understand the urgency now facing you both. Daniel felt a cold, sharp fury rising within him, directed entirely at Finch's calculated manipulation of a system meant to provide fairness, rather than convenient advantage to those already possessing wealth and influence. Is there nothing we can do? He asked. Some appeal, some argument we might present. Doyle considered the question carefully before answering. There may be one option, he said slowly. If you can demonstrate before the court that reasonable progress has been made toward settling the debt, and that additional time would result in full payment, the judge may grant an extension despite Finch's efforts to expedite matters. It would require presenting your case clearly, along with whatever funds you have already gathered, as evidence of genuine effort rather than avoidance. Then that is exactly what we will do, Daniel said firmly, though privately, doubt gnawed steadily at his resolve. Half the required sum, gathered through weeks of exhausting labor, seemed a thin argument against a man as calculating and well-connected as Gerald Finch appeared to be. After Doyle departed, Daniel and Claire sat together in heavy silence, the weight of 5 remaining days pressing down upon them both, with an intensity far greater than the original 30 had ever carried. Outside, Lily and Noah's laughter drifted faintly through the windows, blissfully unaware that the home they knew, the only home they had ever known, now teetered dangerously close to being taken from them entirely. "We need more than money," Claire said eventually, breaking the silence. "We need something that demonstrates clearly and undeniably that this house rightfully belongs within this family, regardless of whatever debt exists." Daniel considered her words carefully, an idea slowly forming in his mind. "My father's original will," he said. "If it exists somewhere, clearly stating his wishes regarding this house, it might carry weight before the court, even without a formal deed transfer completed before his passing. Do you know where such a document might be found?" Claire asked, hope flickering cautiously behind her tired eyes. "I do not," Daniel admitted, "but I intend to search every corner of this house until I either find it, or confirm beyond doubt that no such document exists." That evening, after the children had gone to sleep, Daniel and Claire began searching through old trunks and forgotten drawers scattered throughout the house, sorting carefully through decades of accumulated papers, letters, and keepsakes, belonging to a family now scattered across grief and distance, in ways none of them could have predicted years earlier. Hours passed without success, the growing pile of discarded papers offering nothing beyond old letters and faded photographs, until, well past midnight, Claire's hands stilled suddenly over a small, weathered box, tucked deep within an old trunk in the attic. "Daniel," she called softly, her voice carrying an urgency that brought him quickly to her side. "I believe I have found something." Daniel crossed the attic quickly, kneeling beside her as she carefully lifted the lid of the small box, revealing a stack of yellowed papers tied together with a faded ribbon. Her hands trembled slightly as she untied the knot, both of them leaning close in the dim candlelight to examine the contents within. The first several pages contained old letters, correspondence between Daniel's parents from years before either he or Ethan had been born, offering little of immediate value, beyond a tender glimpse into a history neither of them had known. Daniel set these aside gently, continuing through the stack until his fingers paused over a single folded document, its paper slightly different from the rest, marked clearly at the top with formal, official lettering. "This is it," Daniel breathed, carefully unfolding the page. His eyes scanned quickly across the handwritten text, his father's familiar signature visible clearly at the bottom, alongside 2 additional signatures Daniel recognized as belonging to old family friends who had witnessed the document's creation. "What does it say?" Claire asked, leaning closer, her voice tight with anticipation. Daniel read carefully, his heart pounding steadily as the words became clear. "It is a formal statement," he said slowly, "written and witnessed nearly 5 years ago, clearly declaring my father's intention that this house pass fully to Ethan upon his passing, in recognition of his continued presence and care for the family home during my absence." Claire's breath caught audibly. "Then it exists," she whispered. "Ethan was telling the truth all along. Your father truly intended this house for him." "It appears so," Daniel confirmed, though a complicated mixture of emotions stirred within him as he studied the document further. Though it also states clearly that should Ethan predecease his father, or pass without an update to this arrangement, the property would then transfer according to standard inheritance law, meaning directly to the eldest surviving son. Claire's hope faltered slightly at this additional detail. "Meaning you," she said quietly. "Meaning me," Daniel confirmed, feeling the weight of the document's full implications settling heavily upon him. "This confirms my legal ownership, just as clearly as it confirms my father's original intention to leave the house with Ethan and his family." They sat together in tense silence, studying the document further, searching for any additional detail that might strengthen their position before Finch's rapidly approaching court hearing. Finally, Daniel set the paper down carefully, meeting Claire's worried gaze directly. This document proves my father never intended this house to serve as collateral for any outstanding debt, Daniel said slowly, an idea forming steadily in his mind. If Finch's claim rests upon seizing the property itself, we might argue instead that my father's clear intention was for this house to remain a stable home for his family, regardless of financial obligations owed separately. The debt belongs to my father's estate broadly, not specifically tied to this property according to any language written here. Claire considered this carefully, her exhaustion briefly replaced by cautious optimism. "Do you believe the court will accept such reasoning?" she asked. "I do not know," Daniel admitted honestly, "but it offers considerably more strength than the arguments we possessed only hours ago. Combined with the funds we have already gathered, and Doyle's willingness to present our case fairly, we at least stand a genuine chance now, rather than facing this hearing with empty hands." Over the following days, Daniel and Claire worked tirelessly alongside Arthur Doyle, preparing carefully for the approaching hearing. Doyle reviewed the newly discovered document with evident interest, confirming that while it did not entirely eliminate the debt owed, it provided meaningful context that could reasonably support an argument against Finch's aggressive attempt to seize the property so far ahead of the originally agreed timeframe. "This is a solid foundation," Doyle said, reviewing his notes carefully during their final meeting before the hearing. "Combined with the funds already gathered, and a clear demonstration of continued good faith effort toward settling the remaining debt, I believe we have a reasonable chance of securing additional time, if not outright dismissal of Finch's expedited claim entirely." Daniel felt a cautious relief settle over him, tempered still by the knowledge that reasonable chances offered no guarantee against a man as determined and resourceful as Gerald Finch had already proven himself to be. That evening, as the household prepared for sleep ahead of the hearing scheduled for the following morning, Claire found Daniel sitting alone on the porch, staring out into the darkened yard where Lily and Noah had played so freely just hours earlier. "You are worried," she said softly, joining him on the steps. "I am," Daniel admitted. "Not simply for myself, though I confess the thought of losing this house, after everything I endured to return here, weighs heavily upon me. I worry more for you, and for the children. I have only known you a short time, yet I find myself unable to imagine watching you lose the only stability you have built since Ethan's passing." Claire studied him quietly in the moonlight, something tender and unspoken passing between them, born from weeks of shared struggle and slowly deepening understanding. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said finally, "I am grateful you returned when you did, Daniel. Grateful for your protection and your kindness, even amid such uncertain circumstances." Daniel met her gaze steadily, feeling something shift quietly within his chest, an emotion he had not expected to feel again, after years of guarded survival. "Tomorrow we face Finch together," he said firmly. "Whatever the outcome, know that I do not intend to abandon this fight, or abandon you and the children, regardless of what the court ultimately decides." They sat together in comfortable silence beneath the quiet night sky, both keenly aware that the following morning would determine far more than simple ownership of a house, but rather the entire future of the fragile, unexpected family slowly forming between them, a future now resting almost entirely upon the outcome of tomorrow's difficult hearing. The regional courthouse stood at the center of town, an imposing brick building Daniel had passed countless times as a boy, without ever imagining he would one day stand within its walls fighting to protect his family's home. He arrived early that morning alongside Claire and Arthur Doyle, the three of them exchanging few words as they waited in the corridor outside the hearing room, each lost in private thoughts about what the coming hours might bring. Gerald Finch arrived shortly afterward, accompanied by a well-dressed associate carrying a thick folder of documents. He nodded politely toward Daniel and Claire, though his expression carried the calm confidence of a man who fully expected the proceedings to favor him regardless of whatever argument might be presented against his claim. When the hearing finally began, the presiding judge, an older woman with sharp, attentive eyes, listened carefully as Finch's associate outlined the details of the outstanding debt, presenting official records confirming the sum owed and the original agreement establishing the 30-day time frame. The judge then turned her attention to Doyle, inviting him to present the position of Daniel Hart and Claire Bennett regarding the matter at hand. Doyle rose calmly, presenting first the funds already gathered over the preceding weeks, demonstrating clearly the genuine effort made toward settling the debt, despite the significant hardship involved. He then introduced the recently discovered document, carefully explaining its origin and its clear indication of the elder Hart's intentions regarding the family home, separate entirely from any financial obligations owed to outside parties. This document, Doyle argued firmly, demonstrates clearly that the property in question was never intended by its original owner to serve as collateral against personal debt. While the debt itself remains valid and must eventually be settled, we respectfully argue that seizing this family's home represents an action far beyond what fairness or the original owner's clear wishes would support. The judge studied the document carefully, taking considerable time to review its contents before addressing the room again. "This is compelling evidence," she said finally, "though it does not entirely eliminate the validity of the debt owed to Mr. Finch." Finch's associate rose quickly, attempting to argue against the relevance of the newly presented document, insisting that regardless of the original owner's intentions, the debt remained legally tied to whatever assets existed within the estate, including the property itself. The judge listened patiently, though her expression suggested she remained unconvinced by this counter-argument. "Mr. Finch," the judge said eventually, addressing him directly, "you agreed initially to a 30-day time frame for settlement of this debt. That agreement, as far as this court is concerned, remains binding unless clear evidence demonstrates deliberate avoidance or bad faith on the part of the debtor's family. I see no such evidence here. Instead, I see a family working diligently, under considerable hardship, to meet an obligation neither of them created." Finch's expression tightened slightly, though he remained outwardly composed, accustomed evidently to occasional setbacks within his long career of similar dealings. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "I simply wish to ensure the debt is properly settled, without unnecessary delay." "And it shall be," the judge replied firmly, "within the time frame originally agreed upon, not before. I am dismissing your request for expedited transfer of the property. The original 30-day agreement stands, with the remaining days counted from today, given the additional time already lost due to this unnecessary hearing." A wave of relief washed over Daniel and Claire simultaneously, though neither allowed their expressions to shift too visibly within the formal setting of the courtroom. Finch, for his part, accepted the ruling with visible reluctance, gathering his papers alongside his associate before departing the courtroom without further comment, though the look he cast toward Daniel on his way out carried a clear warning that this matter, in his mind, remained far from concluded. Outside the courthouse, once the three of them stood alone beneath the midday sun, Claire finally allowed her composure to break, tears of relief slipping freely down her face, as Daniel placed a steadying hand gently upon her shoulder. "We still owe him the remainder," she said, half laughing through her tears. "But we have time now, real time, rather than an impossible 5 days." "We do," Daniel agreed, feeling his own tension slowly beginning to ease for the first time in weeks. "And we will find a way to gather the rest, together, exactly as we have managed everything else since I returned." Doyle offered his congratulations before departing to attend other matters, leaving Daniel and Claire to walk back toward the house together, the weight of the morning's hearing slowly lifting from their shoulders with each step along the familiar road. When they arrived home, Lily and Noah rushed forward eagerly, having spent the morning under the care of a kind neighbor, their faces lighting up with relief at seeing their mother and uncle return with clearly lightened spirits. "Did we win?" Lily asked directly, displaying the blunt honesty only young children seem capable of expressing so plainly. "We did," Claire said, kneeling to embrace her daughter warmly. "We have more time now to make things right." Over the following weeks, Daniel and Claire continued working steadily toward gathering the remaining sum owed, though the atmosphere within the household shifted considerably following the successful hearing, growing lighter, more hopeful, filled increasingly with small moments of genuine warmth rather than constant, anxious calculation. Daniel found steady work assisting a local builder, his skills adapting quickly despite years away from such labor, while Claire continued her sewing work, the two of them combining their efforts with renewed determination and considerably less desperation than before. Slowly, almost without either of them fully realizing it, the house itself began transforming as well, shifting gradually from a place of quiet grief and uncertain ownership into something resembling genuine home once more. Daniel repaired the fallen fence at the edge of the yard, restoring the boundary that had marked his childhood home for decades. Claire planted new flowers along the front walkway, small additions that brought unexpected brightness to the otherwise weathered exterior of the house. One evening, nearly 2 months after Daniel's unexpected return, the final coins required to fully settle the debt owed to Gerald Finch were counted carefully upon the kitchen table, the wooden box finally emptied entirely of its careful, hard-earned contents. Daniel delivered the payment personally the following morning, watching with quiet satisfaction as Finch counted the sum before signing the necessary papers confirming the debt fully settled. "You managed it," Finch said, something reluctantly close to respect, flickering briefly across his otherwise unreadable expression. Few families manage such a feat within the time frame given. "We had considerable motivation," Daniel replied simply, taking the signed papers before departing the office for what he sincerely hoped would be the final time. That evening, Daniel returned home to find Claire waiting on the porch, the setting sun casting warm, golden light across the yard where Lily and Noah played contentedly nearby. He held up the signed papers as he approached, and Claire's face broke into a wide, genuine smile, the first truly unguarded expression of joy Daniel had witnessed from her since his arrival months earlier. "It is finished," Daniel said, joining her on the steps. "The debt is fully settled. This house belongs to this family, free and clear, exactly as my father originally intended." Claire studied him quietly for a long moment, something tender and unspoken passing between them once more, deepened considerably by the weeks of shared struggle now finally behind them. "What happens now?" she asked softly, echoing the very question Daniel had asked himself on his very first night returning home. Daniel considered the question carefully, watching Lily and Noah continue their play nearby, watching the house behind them standing solid and secure against the fading evening light, representing far more now than simple shelter or inheritance. It represented family, rebuilt from grief and uncertainty into something genuinely worth protecting. "Now," Daniel said finally, "we simply continue building whatever this has become, together. I did not return home searching for a house alone. I see now that I returned searching for exactly this, a family worth fighting for, even one I did not expect to find waiting for me." Claire reached over, taking his hand gently in hers, and Daniel felt, for the first time since his long journey home began years earlier, a genuine and settled peace take root firmly within his chest. The house behind them, weathered yet standing strong, no longer represented merely a structure inherited through complicated circumstance, but rather a home, rebuilt deliberately and lovingly, from the fragile pieces of two intertwined griefs, slowly transformed into something resembling hope. As the sun continued its slow descent beyond the horizon, casting long, gentle shadows across the yard where laughter once again filled the evening air freely, Daniel Hart understood clearly, at last, that coming home had never truly been about reclaiming a house at all. It had always been about finding, and choosing deliberately to protect, a family worth building a future around, regardless of how unexpectedly that family had first appeared standing before him in the quiet darkness of his very first night returning home.